here we are because our lives matter. And God's given us a voice, every single person in this room this morning. And he cares that we're using our voice to live out our purpose, but it's part of something bigger. We're connected to something bigger. And it's God's big purpose in this city and in this country. And these three women who joined me this morning on this panel are doing this in amazing ways. They are using their voices and their lives to influence. And I really believe that through their words, God's got things he wants to speak to you right specifically where you're at this morning. So we've got lots that we want to cover, lots and lots, so I hope you make yourself very comfortable. They all three of them could be speaking to us for a long time. But I'm going to begin with first of all, just let's hear who these women are and what they're up to. So Barb, if you want to start, we'll just...
Sure, I'm Barbara Dosky. I'm a co-pastor with my husband at Faith Alive. I'm president of Women's Journey of Faith, and I also oversee quite a few things at our church. One of them is the TV program that we have that goes across the nation. So, and the Faith Alive Band, we do a lot with that too. So, yeah.
Right on.
Cool.
And the school.
And
she
the
mentioned the
school.
school because we are going to talk about education.
Yes.
So the Christian school there. Yeah.
So my name is Gift Madajemu. I'm a medical student at the University of Saskatchewan. And I go to church here, and I help out with First Impressions.
Thanks, Gift.
My name is Ronke Odumosu, and I serve on the board of Elim here. I work with children's ministries, First Impressions sometimes. I'm also an academic. I'm a law professor, an associate professor of law.
Nice. Right on. Wonderful. So these women are all in different spheres, in our city. And so we've got Barb in ministry and in education, and then Gift in the realm of healthcare and medicine and in those discussions. And Ronki, as a professor of politics, I think you know a little bit about that. So thank you all for being present in those arenas. This morning as we prayed together and we prepared, we were looking at Esther 4, verse 14, where it says, "If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. What's more, who can say but that you have been elevated to the palace for such a time as this?" We know, if we know the story of Esther, that she had an enormous purpose for her whole nation. Mm-hmm. She had to be real brave to live that out. And thank you all for doing that. And we just believe that each one of you are placed strategically by God as well. And Gift, I'm going to just kind of center on you for a few minutes. You are a gift. In the realm of healthcare that you walk in and you work in, I know that you do feel that your voice matters, your influence matters. Can you talk to us a little bit about the voice of one? Why is it important for all of us to believe that one voice, being courageous and brave to speak up, matters?
Well, the first thing I like to think about my faith and my journey with God is I'm here on earth, and He's placed me on earth for a reason. And especially in the society we live in now, where it seems like the voice of Christian people are trying to be silenced, I'm always conscious of the fact that I represent Jesus. And so in medical school as a student, there's so much going on. There are so many policies coming up, and it seems to be not in line with our faith. Yeah. And for me, I need to be able to respectfully share my opinion about this. Yeah. I'm in healthcare for a reason. Jesus is the great healer. Yeah. So we realize this, and we know that we're there to help people. We're there to extend His healing touch through those skills that we have. Yeah. But then there are some things that are not in line with God's word. And though I am trying to do my best, and I am doing my best by God's grace in my field, I need to always realize that I am a child of God. And if I don't speak up, it's not me being forceful. It's not me being saying, oh, you've got to listen to me or holding a placard. But if I do not stand for what I truly believe in, then who is representing Jesus in that space that He's given me? So I realize the importance of my voice. I realize that if I'm put in a position where I have to do something that's against my faith, I need to say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And this is the reason. And the same way people say, oh, we all need to be open-minded, is the same way I expect that my colleagues or my professors or my, anyone who's in there with me, even a patient, would respect that I can do some things
Yes.
just the way you expect me to respect some of the decisions that you have.
Yeah.
So that's where I stand with
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to come back. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Thank you. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about the way that kind of courage spreads, right? But I want to turn it over to Ronki for a moment. Why does one voice matter? Now, Ronki is a professor of politics, so when we're thinking about political sciences and those sorts of things, sometimes we might think that doesn't necessarily involve us unless we're right in that realm. Talk to me, though, about why every single voice in this room matters.
Thank you very much for that question, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. When we started to share together before today, one of the thoughts that came to mind is one thing that I've read about quite often, and it's the point that the personal is political, right? When we think about politics, we like to think about grand politics and big politics, but I think that it doesn't have to be that big for us to be influential. Pastor Kate was asking, what then is politics? And we kind of had the view that anything that extends beyond ourselves and our family influence that we have outside our close friends and our relatives is indeed political.
So can I pause you for a moment? You just said anything outside of our close friends and our family, when we're looking to influence beyond that, that's political. We're making a bigger statement in a bigger sphere than just our friends and family. Okay.
And when we start to think about just the voice of one, how we could do that in our everyday lives, I think, for example, let's say the younger moms here, and we're going to get into that conversation about education being very political. From elementary school all the way to the tertiary level, the kind of voice that mothers have in schools and beyond the classroom, beyond the curriculum, I think about serving on school boards. I think about community associations, because if we don't join our voices and things like that, then things are going to happen in our communities, in our society, without having the voices of godly people being represented. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, there was a conversation around how the law has been changing in Canada about so many things, and a lot of things that happen in the realm of the law. First, it happens in society, and it becomes legalized. And this conversation was happening. And there's this group called Christian Lawyers Fellowship, and the students at the University of Saskatchewan had invited me to come share with them and to spend some time with them. So just the voice of one person being able to assist the students to set up their Christian Lawyers Fellowship, like Gift was saying, even within a realm where the thoughts of Christians are not sometimes really out there, I think that it was something that was helpful to at least get the views of students within the Christian Lawyers Fellowship to speak out and speak out on certain things that were happening within the university and within the student body. So just the voice of one person, I think, is helpful in those so-called small spaces.
Absolutely. Yes, and there is something that happens when the voice of one speaks out and many get connected. And that's actually what we're going to kind of move on to talk about then. When you rise up, when you realize that your voice matters, and not just within your family and your close friends, but in a bigger way, that there's opportunity for that God's given you a voice to influence in those ways, and you see other people beginning to do that, and you get connected to them, so that your peace can enhance their peace and your purpose builds their purpose, we see something begin to happen. And Gift, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. I guess my first question for you is, in your opinion, what is politics?
Well, just to feed off what Ronke has said, politics is anything that you do that would make a difference, really. Because we live in systems that are all political.
Right.
Like, we're here because some policies have been put in place. There are laws in place. There's something going on, and we're part of that bigger system.
Right.
So as individual people, anything that we can do that will make a difference, for example, me saying, oh, I don't want to participate, say, in MAID. That's me making a difference in my own
Right.
field,
Yeah.
and recognizing that I'm a Christian, and even if other Christian people may not be speaking up at the time, I'm actually expressing something that we feel for the most part, and one person has been able to stand up to that, then other people would feel that, okay, well,
Yes.
since she's able to say no to this,
Right.
I guess I can also say no to it,
Yeah.
right? So it's that thing that you do as a person that says, I think this decision I'm going to make is going to make a difference in my life and in the life of other people. So,
And ultimately, isn't that the truth in your life and in the life of other people? One definition of influence is simply to make a difference for other people. Use your power, I forgot that part. Use your power to make a difference for other people. And as women in our society today, sitting here in Canada, in this place, you have power. We have power. So it's talking about stewarding that power to make the difference.
Yeah.
So there's aspects you talked about where you're standing up in certain ways for your faith. What about also the way that when we see women walk forward in courage, to be light or to be a presence, how does that spread?
okay, so first of all, I need to make this disclaimer. When you stand up for stuff, most of the time that isn't popular, you're not going to be popular. You're not going to be liked. People are going to look at you and roll their eyes. Even Christians may look at you and like, why are you being so sticky on this? So you need to define for yourself, what kind of Christian do I want to be? In the worship song that we had, there was a line there that says, I live for your glory, or something like that. And I think when we understand that as Christian women, as Christian individuals, that we're living for the glory of God, that gives us the courage. It's not always easy, and courage, we know, is not doing the easy things. It's standing up in the face of adversity, standing up in the face of people probably trying to ostracize you and who would say they don't even want you in their midst, but knowing that you're never alone. Because as a woman, I know personally that I feel that need to want to connect with other people. I want to be friendly with them. But then I can't do that at the expense of my relationship with Jesus, right? So when we stand up and we have that courage, when one person sees you, the thing is, I have had Christian friends in my class who were like, oh, wow, you said that. Like, I couldn't voice it. And vice versa. I've had a girl who on social media went, like she was just going on and on about her stance on abortion. She's like, I understand there are legitimate reasons, but you can't place it on all of us and you can't expect all of us to just want to do it, right? That is social media, and there was a backlash. I had to go to her secretly. I'm like, wow, I applaud your courage, right? So when one person stands up, people are looking, people are watching. As many people are against you, there's still the same amount of people, or maybe even less, who would say, wow, thank you for doing that, because that gave me courage that the next time that such an opportunity presents itself, I would also want to speak out for my faith. I would also want to represent Jesus. I would also want to live for his glory.
Yeah, and
right?
isn't it true too that you see being connected makes a huge difference, because some things you just touched on, like I am not alone. You know, when you feel like I'm not alone, you just feel like I can keep doing this, I can keep going. You actually build stronger. But we don't always know we're not alone if we're not connected. So there's this idea, even in Saskatoon today, even right here in our city, that the more that we are connected as Christian women, that we know each other, that we can support each other, that we're praying for each other, the more powerful that we are, both individually, but also as a group, moving for the glory of God, like you talked about. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. And Barb, for you in your sphere, in your different spheres, you wear a lot of different hats.
Yes.
You wear a lot of different hats, and you are one woman. And so I think you touched on the importance of knowing Jesus' voice, and knowing that that's what we live for every day, because he helps us know where we need to be. And sometimes if you wear many different hats, that can feel like a lot. But if we stay centered, and Barb, I know that you do this so well, then it's God's ordained influence and purposes for our lives. And I just thank you for living that out. And talk to us a little bit, moving from the discussion of the influence of one, which we are all designed to have, to the courage that happens within a group as a group gets connected. what begins to happen? You used the words when we chatted earlier, a monumental movement.
Yes.
What does that mean? What does that look like? What could that look like for us?
Yes. I taught in our school, a Christian academy, for 20 years. And when I first started teaching in that academy, we had about 80% of our kids, when they got to grade 12, decide not to serve the Lord. And that disturbed my very core being because of, the love I have for children. And to see them succeed in their gifting of the Lord to whatever God's called them for. And so how do you change a whole system to have it where now I would say we have 70 to 80% of our children saying yes to the Lord and staying secure in Him at grade 12. And how do you do that? Well, I learned, because I had two sets of children 10 years apart. My husband had a child from his first marriage, and I adopted him and as my son, and then we had a spiritual son. So I had two sons, and then 10 years later, I had two daughters. And how I raised my two sons were different than how I raised my two daughters. And what I did is I started at home with what I had. And I realized that I have to embrace where I was, because I couldn't change the whole system at that moment, and not that I was trying to change the whole system. I was just saying that my children are going to serve the Lord, as for me and my household. So I started teaching them and teaching them to love the Lord and have a relationship with the Lord. And then because I taught in the Sunday school for just as much as I taught in the classroom, I started bringing that into the classroom. When I was learning with my children, I brought into the Sunday school room, and then I brought it into the classroom. And we started having a whole change. We started, the parents started changing, and some of the things that I learned was I looked at Esther. And sometimes we so often look at a platform with a microphone, and we don't look at where we're at right now. We're not embracing where we're at right now. And Esther, when we look at Esther, we look at the queen who changed a nation. But what I look at Esther is I saw her as an orphan, because she was an orphan, and she was taught by Mordecai, and Mordecai spoke into her life so much, and he trained her so that when she became the queen and a problem arose, she didn't go into her queen crown to pull out what was needed to change her nation. She went in and pulled out what Mordecai taught her. Because you can't go into a fast unless you've maybe experienced what the fast and the power that God gives you in that fast. And as soon as crisis came, what did she do? She called out to the Lord, because it was put in her. Yeah. And so sometimes we look at the queen, but we forget about her beginnings, which was she was taught by Mordecai, and she was given insight spiritually so that she could combat what was before her in the natural realm. Yeah. And then I just kind of scam over here. Yeah. You are called to be a superhero where you're at. You're called to be that person that's reaching up to somebody ahead of you and reaching behind to somebody behind you to pull them into what God has given them. And you have that gift that God's given you. And I want to talk to you about Churchill. We all know who Winston Churchill is. Even the history of who he is and his influence is still alive today, even though he's not alive. And his influence, imagine this, his influence was from a nanny. A nanny in that society was one of the lowest realms, I guess you could call it. The word has lost me. And she was called to be his nanny, but she wasn't just his nanny. She became his all. Did you know that to the day that everywhere he went, he took her picture and put it by his bedside? And what did she do? She trained him how to pray. She trained him how to love the Lord. She put the Lord inside of him. And because she did that, there is his cabin in England, you can go to it, and you will see where the carpet is wore bare because that's where he prayed. And you think of a nanny, And maybe some of you might be a nanny and you think, well, that's such a low life job. What does it matter? Well, that nanny, she didn't look at it like that. She saw someone who was hurting. She saw someone who was who she was in charge of, and she acted in her realm of influence. And her realm of influence and what she chose to do inside of him, she never knew he became the president or prime minister of England. She didn't know what he did in the world wars, but she put God inside of him. And when she put God inside of him, that's what came out. That's how he could move and do what he did, because he relied on the Lord. As crazy as some of his things were, that's what he did. And you know, when she passed away, he got her tombstone and he buried her in honor. And even to this day, the Churchill organization still takes care of her gravesite to this day. And she didn't have any money. They weren't paid very much to be the nanny. And his mother wore one of the largest diamonds in England. She had lots of money, but they wouldn't buy clothes for him. She took her money, which is very, very small. She made him clothes.
The nanny.
The nanny made him clothes. What could you do where you're at?
Yeah, seriously, I think we underestimate the small things. And it's about hearing the voice of God, walking closely with him, giving him the glory, living for his purposes daily, just a daily, like that's the most fulfilling life. And that's the kind of miracles that come out of the daily walking with God, listening for his voice, and then being willing to move where he says. But this connectivity that happens among all the moving pieces is how God accomplishes his big picture purposes on earth.
Yeah.
So we've got to be women who believe that our small obedience is connected to the expansion of the kingdom of God on earth today. For such a time as this, in Saskatoon, starting here.
Yeah.
And it's happening in a bigger picture. I know you're very aware of the national picture that you see that happening on amongst in different women's circles. And Kelly, too, is going to talk a little bit about that as well. But something, as you were speaking with both Churchill and Esther, they did not know the effect of their obedience. We have to remember that. We hear Queen Esther and we think queen. Esther was an orphan. What a great point. And we hear the nanny. And we think, well, yeah, I mean, of course she cared for Winston. Who wouldn't care for Winston? Winston wasn't Winston yet, right? So we've got to be obedient before we see the blessing, before we see the influence that our voice will have when we speak in the ways that God is moving us to. But we do know that he's moving us all to do that. Thank you all so much for your voice this morning.